Olá, tudo bem? Bem-vindo ao meu programa semanal aqui no 247. Esta semana eu vou mostrar 2 entrevistas para vocês, legendado em português, que foram efetuadas pelo The Real News, agência de notícias progressista sediada em Baltimore. E essas 2 entrevistas tratam um assunto comum, o Deep State, ou chamado em português Estado Profundo. O Deep State são as forças que agem nas sombras dentro do governo. E nesse caso a gente fala sobre, não só sobre as agências de inteligência como a CIA, o FBI e as outras 15 agências de inteligência governamental, mas também a indústria de lobby das indústrias bélicas, os bancos, etc., que têm uma certa influência dentro do governo dos Estados Unidos. Então, a primeira entrevista que eu vou mostrar para vocês é com Colin Rowley. Colin foi um agente especial do FBI que virou famoso em 2001, depois dos ataques de 11 de setembro em Nova York, quando ela revelou para a mídia que o FBI deu mais de 100 comunicados para a Casa Branca avisando eles que teria um ataque terrorista contra os Torres Gêmeos e que a Casa Branca ignorou os avisos. Desde então, ela virou celebridade, é jornalista e tal, e hoje ela vai falar sobre um conflito dentro do Deep State estadunidense que está virando polarizado, mas de uma forma geral parece que tem mais agentes agindo a favor do Partido Democrata e contra Trump. Ela acha que isso é preocupante, pois independente de quem vira o próximo presidente, pode até ser Bernie Sanders, o Deep State está ganhando mais força para investigar presidentes. E está ficando um pouco parecido com o que aconteceu com Lava Jato, ou seja, antigamente nos Estados Unidos, agentes do FBI não tinham poder de vazar informações sobre um político para a mídia antes de um processo judicial. E sabendo que alguns desses operativos que está indo atrás do Trump agora estavam envolvidos com Lava Jato, é preocupante. Trump, com certeza, é um corrupto, merece ser tirado do poder, em minha opinião, porque já está fazendo vários crimes. Mas as táticas que o Deep State está usando pode representar um aumento do poder para eles e pode chegar a um ponto enquanto oficiais não eleitos têm poder sobre o governo dos Estados Unidos, da mesma forma que juízes no Brasil têm poder sobre o governo do Brasil, apesar de não ser eleito para o cargo deles. A segunda entrevista é relacionada com esse conceito do Deep State, porque Mark Weisbrot, um economista co-gerente do Center for Economic and Policy Research em Washington, D.C., que eu entrevistei ano passado no 247, ele vai falar sobre o que está acontecendo em Bolívia. Eles fez uma análise das eleições em Bolívia recentes, presidenciais, e falou que não tem evidência nenhuma de qualquer tipo de fraude. Porém, a mídia anglo, o governo dos Estados Unidos e a Organização dos Estados Americanos, eles estão todos dizendo que foi corrupto a eleição, precisou fazer recontagem, que, na opinião do Weisbrot, representa uma tentativa de golpe que está em andamento. Então, eu espero que vocês gostem do programa de hoje. Um abraço para todos e todas de vocês.
Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert in Arlington, Virginia. A just-released book by New York Times reporter James B. Stewart, titled Deep State, Trump, the FBI, and the Rule of Law, compares the FBI's investigations into both Hillary Clinton and into Donald Trump in the lead-up to the 2016 presidential campaign. We rarely take a look at these two investigations side by side because even though they took place more or less at the same time, the information about them was made public at different times. That is, the investigation into Clinton's use of her email while she was Secretary of State became public knowledge when then FBI Director James Comey made announcements about the investigation, first saying it was closed in mid-2016, and then, a mere 11 days before the November election, announced that it was reopened. The other investigation into Russia's suspected interference in the 2016 election was kept mostly secret during the campaign, but became public knowledge afterwards when Trump fired FBI Director James Comey in May 2017. The difference between the way the FBI handled these two investigations raises the question of just how impartial the FBI is and whether there is such a thing as a deep state, as the title of Stewart's book suggests. Joining me now to explore this question is Colleen Rowley. She's a former FBI special agent and division counsel. In 2002, she was named one of Time magazine's Persons of the Year for having exposed some of the FBI's pre-9/11 failures. Thanks for joining us again, Colleen.
Yes, thanks.
So let's start with the comparison of how the FBI handled the two investigations. As I mentioned, the main difference, at least on the surface, was that the investigation into the Clinton emails became public knowledge when there were leaks about it and Comey made announcements about the on-again, off-again nature of the investigation. And the one in the Trump campaign and its connection to Russia didn't become public knowledge until much later. So how would you compare these two investigations? Did the FBI treat them impartially? What do you think?
I'm not a big fan of James Comey, and I've even written opinion pieces critical of both him and Mueller for a lot of reasons. The FBI has a long history of flawed investigations. You should read Mike German's new book, Disrupt, Discredit, and Divide. It's the whole history of Waco and Ruby Ridge and et cetera. There's just a whole bunch of things. Anthrax case. However, in this case, I actually can sympathize with James Comey to some extent because investigating both presidential candidates essentially at the same time, although the Hillary Clinton investigation of her use of a private server started before any information came in about, Russia collusion with Russia. That all started a little bit before. And I think, though, because, we talk now about is the president above the law? And you think about both presidential candidates now being investigated by an FBI director, the big cases always tend to be micromanaged. So they're not normal. They're going to be managed from the top, at the very least by assistant directors and that type of thing, and usually even the director himself. So there are similarities and there are differences in these two investigations. The main similarity, I would say, is the political polarization. And you see that there was talk by some agents of trying to go after Hillary Clinton, their chance to finally find some information about her that she had done something wrong. So that was a little polarized. But then you see that the later investigation of Trump's collusion, which Robert Mueller did not find sufficient evidence of, you find that the agents were even talking more so between each other about trying to go after Trump. So the similarity here is that there was political polarization. And if you think about how the FBI is supposed to be the least political agency, they were under the Hatch Act. You weren't even supposed to wear a political button or anything. So this is very unprecedented, at least from the time I was in the FBI. The differences, I think a main difference between the Hillary Clinton and the investigation of Trump and Russia is the aggressiveness. In the Hillary Clinton investigation, it did start early, but it was long, criticized that the FBI did not use the grand jury. They did not even use the grand jury process in order to subpoena records. And they seemed to, go lightly on Hillary Clinton and interviewing her. James Comey now admits that they made the decision very early on that they would not be able to prove malicious intent. He said, well, she was very careless and reckless in using the private server, but we couldn't actually prove a bad malicious intent on her part. And that he admits now that decision was made very early on. Well, what that did then was that the aggressiveness of the investigation did not seem to be normal. Now, in the investigation of Russia, if you think about a foreign country allegedly taking emails from the DNC server, and the FBI does not even do the forensic work itself in examining that server, but allows the Democrats' own private company to do all the forensic work. That, of course, is less than aggressive as well. And there were calls also that came from the DNC that seemed to have been treated lightly or ignored early on. Now, when the investigation of Russia gets started, they actually then go to using the FISA courts. And you know what? FISA is quite a, anytime you're going to use electronic surveillance, that would mean that that's very aggressive. You have to have probable cause that it's a foreign power. And in this case, they went after one of the Trump associates very early on, but then thinking that it would lead to other people being trapped up, and they signed on to it for 4 times. So I think that, and they even used interviews where the interview of Flynn, where they didn't tell him that they were investigating him, they didn't give him Miranda rights, etc. So I think that you see a difference in the aggressiveness in both investigations ultimately. This week or next week, very soon probably, there will be an IG Inspector General report. Inspector General Horowitz is going to release his report of how he thinks the FBI and the DOJ did in investigating the Russia collusion. And we already have his report of the FBI investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails. He found no real problem. I mean, he criticized a little, but he did not, he more or less exonerated the FBI in investigating Hillary Clinton. And it remains to be seen if he will exonerate everyone now in the investigation of Donald Trump and the allegations of Russia.
Now, when we compare these 2 investigations, as you just did, would you say that they give us reason to believe that there is something such as a deep state that is trying to manipulate presidents and presidential elections, as Stewart's book seems to suggest? And if there is some kind of manipulation going on, what interests do they seem to be pursuing?
There's always been, deep state has kind of a bad connotation, so we could choose the term permanent state. And certainly presidents come and go, but people like CIA career officials, State Department career officials, FBI career officials stay. And so I think obviously you can't argue there's a permanent state. The question is this power dynamic. And, in other times, I think that the president clearly would have been able to order, intelligence agencies to pretty much do what they want, even illegal orders, as in Iran-Contra and all these different times when presidents actually gave illegal orders to their agencies. Look at Bush ordering torture and Rumsfeld ordering torture. And most of the agencies went along with that. And so I think in most cases, you don't have agency officials second guessing the president. And I would say they should at some times, especially when the orders are illegal. However, I think what has changed, and again, this is some evidence for how powerful the permanent state has now become, is that, the polarization is so different now than ever before, extremely unprecedented. And we have these different camps fighting for power, almost in a life and death, War of the Roses struggle right now. On the one side, you have the Dem leadership, you have the war hawk think tanks, you have corporate media, you also have trying to think on the one side, but that's a very powerful, the intelligence. You have some of the permanent state, not all of them, but you definitely have some of those former intelligence directors on that side. And on the other side, you have Trump, some of his remaining loyalists, I would say probably his base, his Christian fundamentalists, and very little of the media. So you got them locked in this struggle. And, if you were really trying to do your job as an FBI agent right now, it would be very, very difficult. And I would say, again, this is really unprecedented because of the polarization and this power struggle. It actually, I think, goes way beyond even Watergate. I think that we're almost in a constitutional crisis right now. A lot of people are saying, this, no one knows how it's going to turn out, but it's very, very different. And the permanent, if you go back to Schumer, who told Rachel Maddow, he said, Trump's being very stupid because by criticizing his intelligence community, they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back at you. And, there's precedent for that. There is precedent for intelligence agencies going after the executive branch. Some of those to this day remain unknown, and, people call them conspiracies and everything, but there is precedent because they do have a certain amount of power. And especially when you have these 2 different camps right now.
Now, of course, this is going to be of major concern where somebody such as Bernie Sanders elected as president, if that were to happen. And so I guess my next question is, well, what is there that, could be done to reform these institutions so that they don't undermine, an elected president? Now, I'm not saying that this actually happened necessarily, but we could imagine that that could happen if, let's say, somebody such as Sanders were elected.
Yeah, exactly. The precedent now has been set. And anytime you're setting a precedent, for instance, just the leaking is a good example. Directors are not supposed to leak. They have in the past. They've tried to control narratives and they've leaked. But we've also now set a terrible precedent of leaking information, which in some cases could actually be dangerous and certainly is wrong, this notion of controlling the media. So I think that the way it could be fixed, the old notion of draining the swamp might be pie in the sky. It's just really at a certain point right now, it's maybe gone past that idea that you can fix it. We have systemic issues right now. And one is that it's not a question of merely undermining the president. I would say, like I said, if the president is doing something illegal, those directors have to say, no, we aren't going to torture. That's illegal. We can't do that, Dick Cheney. We can't do that. So there are points where directors have to be very powerful, but there's also times when when in conducting foreign policy, etc., a president cannot be second guessed on every single telephone conversation that they engage in either. We have, I think, perhaps the one answer is to start going after this endemic corruption. I'm going to suggest one good way that would probably go a long ways to fixing things, and you wouldn't have this polarization, which is of public officials. Congress should pass a law. This should not be legal for public officials to have these second careers as lobbyists for foreign countries, as lobbyists for special interests, generals and directors now becoming talking heads on media. We need to have some restraints on this, what they call normalized corruption. And it causes conflicts of interest. There are easy ways to remedy that. We're not supposed to have emoluments. You're not supposed to make a lot of money off of public service. And I think if we could fix that problem, trying to reduce the amount of profiteering off of public service, and I think it could be fixed. We just have to get much stricter ethics laws and enforce the current Office of Government Ethics laws that we already have. That would probably go a long ways. It wouldn't be the complete solution, but it would help.
Well, we're going to leave it there for now. I was speaking to Colleen Rowley, FBI whistleblower and former special agent. Thanks again, Colleen, for having joined us today.
Yes, thanks, Greg.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network. Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Greg Wilpert in Baltimore. Bolivia held a presidential election last Sunday, and according to the official vote count, incumbent President Evo Morales won re-election to the presidency by a razor-thin margin. Actually, as of Thursday, the latest numbers show, with 99% of the votes counted, that Morales got 46.95% of the vote, and former President Carlos Mesa got 36.6% of the vote. That's a 10.3% lead for Evo Morales. However, according to Bolivia's constitution, a runoff vote is only avoided if one of the candidates gets at least 40% of the vote and has at least a 10-point lead relative to the candidate with the second most votes. Carlos Mesa and his supporters are now saying there was fraud. He's now calling on his supporters to take to the streets and to protest against the result. Here's what Mesa had to say on Wednesday.
It is evident that there has been a wide process of fraud. It is also evident that any result that shows Evo Morales as the winner in the first round is a product of fraud. And we are going to present all of this in the next few hours.
The Organization of American States, which had an electoral observer mission in Bolivia, supported Mesa's claim, saying that there were, quote, irregularities, and that even if the 10-point margin of difference were true, a second runoff vote should be scheduled anyway.
The
definitive results show a 9.48 difference between the candidates, which means that there should be a second round. In the event that the counting has concluded and the margin of difference be more than 10%, it's reasonable to conclude that it would be in relation to the problems witnessed during the electoral process. A second round continues to be the best option.
Both sides are now calling for their supporters to mobilize on the streets, and President Evo Morales has even said that the opposition's actions amount to a coup attempt. Joining me now to discuss the Bolivian presidential election is Mark Weisbrod. He's co-director of the Center for Economic and Policy Research and author of the book Failed: What the Experts Got Wrong About the Global Economy. Thanks for joining us again, Mark.
Thanks, Gregory. Great to be here.
So on Monday night, Manuel Gonzalez, who we actually just saw, the head of the OAS observer mission, said he was profoundly concerned by the, quote, drastic reversal in the vote results relative to Sunday night, which had showed an 8-point difference between Morales and Mesa. Now it's a more than 10-point difference. You recently took a deep dive into the Bolivian election results. What did you find? What happened?
Yes, this was a very irresponsible thing of the OAS to do. And you can see in their later statements and their since then in their preliminary report, they're starting to walk back from this. They still don't have any evidence that there was any fraud whatsoever. And it wasn't that hard to explain for anybody who bothered to look at the data, how it was that the results, the later results that came in had a margin for Evo that was bigger than the earlier ones. And that's simply because they came from areas where he had more support. And this isn't unprecedented. You see this in elections and election results from time to time. Very often rural areas where he does actually have more support come in later than urban ones, or the richer areas will come in faster. So there's really nothing there at all. We looked at the data and it's all on the web. The election's very transparent and all of the data is up there from all of the polling places. And you can see it. You can see that the change in trend didn't come from a change in the way people were voting. It just came from a change in the areas that were reporting later. Those areas reported about the same margin than they did before that break.
Now, it's interesting to note, I think, that major media outlets such as the New York Times are running screaming headlines saying things such as, there could be a war, protests over elections, royal Bolivia, and president accused of fraud in Bolivia election as he opens a big vote lead. Now, what do you think of these kinds of headlines and these kinds of accusations? How serious do they look? And also, if you could make a comparison to other cases, such as elections in Mexico, which you've also studied, I mean, how does this compare?
Oh, yes. Well, this is much more hostile. I mean, 2006, you had an election in Mexico, and where the Calderon won by 0.6 percentage points. And there was so much slop in that election. We looked at it very carefully that there was no way you could tell who won. and the media simply accepted it without question. I personally didn't. We looked at it quite a bit. We didn't find any hard evidence of fraud, so we didn't allege fraud. But we could say that, for example, half of the mesas, the polling places, the numbers didn't add up, and so you really couldn't say who won. And this is a problem, in any election that's close. They were particularly sloppy, but really in any election that's close, and even in the United States, remember Bush versus Gore in 2000, you really can't say who won. That's always going to be a problem. And so you have to go by the results. And if they're really, if they're really unclear, people can recommend a recount or doing it over. But, there's always going to be people who proclaim fraud. It's happened in a lot of the elections we've looked at in Latin America. And the only one where we know that it really did happen, where it was Honduras in the last election.
Now, what is the OAS's and the Secretary General's, Luis Almagro's, role in all of this? I mean, they started out, first of all, with this, this pronouncement, and Luis Almagro has been retweeting it. What do you think the effect of their position will have on Bolivia and on Morales' claim for legitimacy?
Well, the OAS, as I said, is playing a terrible role here. I mean, I can't speak to everybody's individual motivation except for Almagro. You can see he's a fanatic. He's been tweeting about, or actually issued a press release blaming all the demonstrations you see in Ecuador and Chile, all on outside forces. People he doesn't like, Cuba, Venezuela, whoever. So he's really not a credible source. And I'm afraid he's part of the problem here since he's running the OAS. But I think it comes from further up. You can see, for example, and we put this in our press release, a tweet from Rubio hours before the OAS issued their press release where they implied that there was something wrong with the results without offering one shred of evidence. And Rubio was encouraging them to do that. And then there were other Trump administration officials. And they have a lot of influence over the OAS because they supply 60% at least of the money for the OAS. And so they've manipulated the OAS before. In fact, in 2011 in Haiti, the OAS had an observer mission that literally reversed. They did something no observers have ever done, or, in my knowledge. They reversed the results of the first round of Haiti's presidential election without even a recount or even a statistical analysis, nothing. And they basically admitted later that it was political, but they got away with it. And they've done that. They did that once before in Haiti as well. They changed their original report, which said the election was clean. It was in 2000, in order to go along with the regime change effort of the United States, which lasted from 2000 to 2004. And it was very heavily based on that illegitimacy that was alleged by the OAS, which had no foundation whatsoever. And that's what I'm really worried about, because this is really a setup. It's really as ugly as it looks, and you really do have the OAS. As I said, they're backing off. They're backing off quite a bit now. They won't say what they said in that statement again, but they've done the damage and they've led the media, and so that's, I think, partly responsible, at least for some of those headlines you saw.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also impressive that they say that even if the result is more than 10%, there should be a second round. I mean, that they would go out on a limb like that.
Yeah, that's a little outrageous for an electoral observation and mission to say. But again, to be fair, from a practical standpoint, it is true that when elections are really close, you almost never know who actually won. So this is close. I mean, it's not that close. I've seen, this is at least, I think he got at least, it's looking like 10.4 or something. So that should be enough to certify the results. And again, there's no allegation and no indication
today.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining the Real News Network.